Thank you for the welcome, Margaret. And welcome to you, Julie Bindel. You are here to present your last books, The Pimping of Prostitution, Abolishing the Sex Work Myth. And I will say that you in this book have uncovered the global sex trade as it is today. Lots of topics to be covered here, and the chapters goes like this: the sex work revolution, the myth of health and safety, realities and consequences of legalization, the invisible man, sanitizing the sex trade, the abolitionist movement, the sex workers' rights movement, sex trade academics, the human rights and wrongs, and then a queer defense of the sex trade, and surviving the sex trade. And all in all, my opinion is that we are going to, this evening to talk a lot about money. I asked you, Julia, who are the abolitionists? And you answered me like this: that is, those with the goal to bring about an end to the global sex trade, and to strive for a world where no woman, man or child is prostituted, a world where sex is not bought, sold or brokered. Your book came out last week, it's 5 days ago, and the book launch in Norway, that means Bergen, Stavanger, and tomorrow Oslo, is the first stop on a world tour. Next stop for you is mid-October. That is your hometown, London. And then, further on, it is New York, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta in November. And then Vancouver, Canada, is that? And back to U.S., Boston, and in December, Berlin, and then India. You mean New Delhi, don't you?
I mean Mumbai.
Oh, yeah, okay. So that is really a world tour. In the other places, you have invited survivors of prostitution to share the stage with you. Survivors who actually are working hard politically to have a similar law in England, in US, in Germany, etc. We have no survivors to share the book launch with you here, but we have invited an outstanding member of the police force, who are the ones that handle the law here in Norway, for whom the sex buyers, the traffickers, and the prostituted women are a reality. Yes, first that was a sort of an introduction, and then comes my first question. I'm actually going to book launch, not Bokbad, okay? Boklansering. Why this title, The Pimping of Prostitution? It absolutely fits the book, but how does it fit the actual situation?
Well, pimping has become synonymous with making something glamorous, with adding to it in a good way. So pimp your coffee might mean that you add some hazelnut syrup. Pimp your ride may mean that you put new wheels on your car, and so on and so forth. And pimping is actually abusing, exploiting, and selling women. But we've been told by the pro-prostitution lobby over the years that pimping is a racist term because it used to be used to describe black men in perfectly legitimate relationships with women, and that we shouldn't use it. But what we would argue is that you should call a pimp and not make racist assumptions about who they are. It's clear who the pimps are. So what's happened in the way that prostitution's been sanitized in the last few years is it's been pimped. It's been pimped to a state where we use terms such as the girlfriend experience, which is straightforward prostitution, but over a longer period of time. We use terms such as sex surrogacy, or mail-order brides, when it's all prostitution. And then the subtitle of the book is Abolishing the Sex Trade Myth. And that's because I wanted to get the term abolitionism in there. And I wanted to make it clear that this is knocking down the arguments made by the pro-prostitution lobby that will tell you that prostitution is work and that it's about sex.
You say in your book, just to finish this question, that those who support the sex trade use terminology that masks the reality of what it is, what it actually is. One person, almost always a male, having sex with another person, almost always a female, without mutual desire. The sex buyer knows that the woman he is buying does not want to have sex with him, otherwise he wouldn't have had to pay her. We have to talk more about language, and now I want you to explain more the difference between sex work and prostitution. How come that we now see sex work everywhere?
People who are well-meaning think that referring to a prostituted person as a sex worker dignifies that person and removes the stigma. But what it in fact does is it dignifies prostitution. It dignifies the sex buyer, and nothing dignifies the prostituted woman. The stigma is still attached to her and not the sex buyer, unless you have legislation and public education, such as you have here in Norway and in other countries. And that's the only thing that will change it. And so to refer to a prostituted person as a sex worker is suggesting that this is a legitimate form of labour, that it's completely chosen, freely entered into, and that it's part of an industry, of a job market. And we know that not to be true. Similarly, we don't refer to anyone as a prostitute, because this is not who that person is. It is something done to those of us that have been prostituted or raped or otherwise abused under patriarchy. So I think it's important that we recognise the value of language and how it skews people's opinions. Whilst liberals will use sex work without realising the politics behind it and the sanitisation project that this term was part of, they then start to see prostitution differently. Prostitution's an ugly thing, and we should keep ugly words to describe it because it is ugly. So when I went to an academic conference of mainly, everybody except for 3 of us, who believe in the sex work myth, I heard all kinds of euphemisms, and I write about this in the book, such as breach of contract, meaning rape. So breach of contract in a brothel means that he had sex with a woman without a condom, without her consent, which is rape. And juvenile sex worker was a term that was used. Migration for sex work was used for trafficking. And health and safety means avoiding being murdered or getting a life-threatening disease such as HIV or unwanted pregnancies. So how you can actually analogize workplace safety in prostitution with a builder that might have a brick dropped on his foot is beyond me.
In your book, you also you have done a study which you have put into the book of how often the change of using sex work how it has changed what it's called the ratio. sex work to prostitution. You started out counting, I don't know how you did it, from 2005 up till 2015. And what was the result?
Well, I did it by using an international newspaper database that has local, national and international newspapers as far back as the early 1980s. And if you expect me to remember those numbers, Agnete, then you're a better woman than I am. But what I can tell you is that sex work, the term sex work, has crept in until it's become almost de rigueur. So I'm just going to read from here. In 2005, the ratio of the use of the term sex work to prostitution was 1 in 20. So there were 20 uses of the word prostitution for 1 use of the term sex work. And this moved slightly over the next few years, with the ratio rising to 1 in 9 in 2013. But in recent years, the increase has come more rapidly, and the ratio has risen to around 1 in 6 in 2014 and 2015. So it's used now in most newspapers by people that are quoted, not just the editorial. So police officers tend to use it now in many countries, in my country. Health workers use it, journalists use it. And when we had in the UK in 2006 the murder of 5 street prostituted women in a town called Ipswich, murdered by a sex buyer, of course, who was trusted by the women. The newspaper that I wrote about this case in asked all of the journalists who were covering the case, including me, what should the preferred term be. Some use prostitute, some use sex work, and of course that everybody was in favour of sex work, more or less, except for me and one other. And I emailed back and suggested that we perhaps use the word woman, because it really was between prostitute, which is unacceptable, and sex worker, which doesn't exist.
I can add that the women's movement internationally are following very closely the wordings like that in the UN documents, and it has crept into several UN documents, but still the main documents that for the rights of women that are laid down in CEDAW and voted on in the General Assembly, it is prostitution and and not sex work or sex workers. So that is one battlefield. The organizer here in Stavanger, I said this in Bergen too, wrote in their information sheet before the book launch, quote, "What is it about criminalization of buying sexual services? Should we establish prostitution as a profession and set up brothels, or should we maintain our position on criminalizing the buyer of sexual services?" Julie, there is an opposition here in Norway to the existing law, but no one will openly advocate for the system that we find, such as we have it in the Netherlands or in Germany. Instead, a country far, far away, which none of us has been to, I think, New Zealand is presented. Us is presented as the full legalized prostitution paradise. You have been to New Zealand, and I ask you, is New Zealand an option for Norway?
Absolutely not. New Zealand isn't an option for anywhere, and it isn't an option for New Zealand. But unfortunately, it was voted in 2003 with 1 vote after a lobby by libertarians who believed, genuinely I'm sure, that this would be safer for the women and that it was a way that it could keep prostitution in the without driving it further underground, etc. All of the usual cliches that you've heard in favour of decriminalisation, which is very, very similar to legalisation. There's not much between it. In fact, New Zealand has a list of rules and regulations that the women have to comply with or they can be sacked and fined. And the brothel owners have to fill in a form that is 3 pages long, to get a license for a brothel. And in fact, it's half the size, half the length of the form that we have to fill in my country if we want to adopt a dog or a cat from the rescue centre. It's not an option because what it's doing is giving up completely on the women, and it's suggesting that prostitution is inevitable, necessary, can never be eradicated or challenged. And it's that pessimistic politics that we don't have about any other social ill. As people on the left, or as good liberals, or whatever we are, we don't say that about child sexual abuse. We don't say it about racism. We don't say it about poverty in certain countries or regions of the world. We say, let's do this, let's fix it, let's abolish it, let's make it right. But with prostitution, somehow, even those that should know better have this politics of inevitability. And you've all heard, I'm sure, on many an occasion, or, well, you know, younger people in the room who've been lucky enough to enter into adulthood since the law criminalising the buying of sex, you know, may well not have heard all this nonsense. But you've heard that prostitution has always been here, it always will be. You've even heard that it's the oldest profession. It's certainly not a profession, and it's probably farming or midwifery. Either way, people believe it and they churn it out. And that's exactly what New Zealand has done. It has said there is a certain section of society, the women, that are there to be used for men's pleasure, that they're not good enough for anything else, that men need this sexual release or they'll go out and, quote, unquote, rape real women, as one sex buyer said to me, and many others have thought. What it actually does by introducing this decriminalised model is say that men can't control their own sexuality, that they are all potential rapists, which is a disgrace. And as a feminist, I find that deeply offensive, because we wouldn't be doing the work that we're doing if we thought that about men. But it's an easy it's a get-out clause for some men who really do want us to believe that they have to do this, or something terrible will happen to them and to women. We have a wonderful survivor called Sabrina Vallis in Space International that Agnete and I are both board members of, who is a formerly prostituted woman. She's a sex trade survivor. She was born in Australia, moved to New Zealand, was prostituted over a period of 24 years in legal, decriminalised and prohibitive brothels. And she tells the truth about what happens in decriminalised sex industries, trades. And she fought for decriminalisation alongside a sex workers' rights group called the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective. She believed it was safer for the women. She did it with all good intentions. And very soon after it came into force, she realised that it was a disaster. And the example that she gives that sticks in my mind, there are many, many examples, and I really appeal to you to read her writing, and also an interview I've done with her recently, which I'll give you the link to. She said that the men can ask for all-inclusives when they go into the brothel, into decriminalised brothels. And that means that they pay a certain amount of money, and they get a beer and a burger, and they can have sex with as many women in whatever way they wish that they can. And also, you know, at lunchtimes or on particular days, there's a half-price deal for pensioners to have this all-inclusive. Now, that means that the women can't set the price, which was always a promise of decriminalisation. And it also means that the women can't say no to certain sexual practices, such as kissing or anal sex or sex without a condom. So it removes the rights from the women, it gives the brothel owners the power, and of course it gives the sex buyers the power to do what they want with the women. And that's one small example in a myriad of examples that Sabrina gives about how it's been a disaster. And we must never, ever even consider it to be good legislation.
Thank you. We have talked already, but you talk more in your book about sanitization sanitization of the sex trade, and that acceptance of the sex trade has become mainstream. Can you give us some examples? Because in my head, the trafficking, for example, is the third biggest organized crime together with arms and drugs. And trafficking is necessary for the profit of the pimps, the brothel owners, and the traffickers. So, sanitization, how?
Mm-hmm. An example that, excuse me, that comes to mind was when I visited a pro-prostitution support centre in Nuremberg in Germany, where prostitution has been legalised for a long time. It was probably only Nevada in the US had a legal system before Germany. And the woman who runs it was, of course, very uncritical of prostitution, or sex work as she called it, because they were funded by the government that is the pimp. The government is the pimp when it's legalised. And they were talking about how sex workers get help from their centre. And of course it's mainly about AIDS and HIV prevention in order to keep the men disease-free to go back to their wives. So I asked if she ever offered exiting services for the women. She said, yes, we do. We even retrain them in other jobs for other careers. I said, really? Tell me more about it. Yes, we train them to become sex surrogates. So these women are given training that this organisation is funded to give, and they get a certificate at the end, and this is about helping men with their sexual problems. So, for example, if a man can't get an erection, if a man is a premature ejaculator, if a man has no confidence in the bedroom, etc. If a man hasn't had sex yet and he's into his 20s and is of a nervous disposition. These women, of course, are just performing a service, and they're called sex surrogates. Now, if anyone can tell me the difference between that and prostitution, I'd be really interested to hear. And that's one way in which we can completely rewrite what is actually prostitution. The other way is to say that this isn't about patriarchy, this isn't a violence against women issue, this isn't an issue of gender inequality, because women do it too. Because men are sex workers and women are sex buyers. Right. Well, nowhere ever in the history of the world has there been a brothel for women where men are prostituted. Ever, ever. And I've looked, trust me. And I did some research in Jamaica in 2003 on female sex tourism, which exists, and it is repellent, and it's racist and colonialist and vile, where women will go to countries such as Jamaica or the Dominican Republic and have sex with young men and give them money as gifts. And it's the same and different from straightforward prostitution, but it's not the same as the men who go out to the Philippines or Thailand to abuse women and children and buy them. I'm not defending female sex tourism, that's why I wrote about it. I condemned it very heavily. But it is gendered violence, it is patriarchy, it is men's power and abuse over women and girls, and it wouldn't exist in an equal society, it couldn't. So it's cleansed of its reality. That's what I mean by sanitization. The other side, those that love prostitution, whether for profit or ideology or both, will have us believe that this is something that is just there in a neutral, value-free world. When we tell them that this is about patriarchal power, then it's nasty. When we remind people that it's the interface of capitalism and patriarchy, and it couldn't exist without both, clearly it rumbles them because they just want it to be as straightforward as the buying and selling of second-hand cars.
Thank you. And I think we have to talk about money. And we have to talk about a man named George Soros and his society, is named Open Society Foundation. You can go into the internet and look up both him and especially the Open Society Foundation, because Mr. Soros and his society is now putting his foot into Norway. I did not know, but thanks to your book, I now know that Mr. Soros, since late 1980s, have been able, through his money, to control and determine much prostitution policy and prostitution discourse. So, though you can tell us a little bit more.
Well, George Soros is a billionaire. He made his money from financial speculation, and he is quite a typical libertarian man. Now, the problem is here that he is mainly attacked by right-wing lunatics, by fascists, by anti-Semites, by racists, by people that hate the fact that there's this libertarian giving away his millions to just causes. Now, on the other side of this, those of us that have been looking at the sex trade and who funds the pro-prostitution lobbyists to do their thing, recognise that Soros is not a good man when it comes to women and gender equality at all. There are allegations that he's been violent to women directly, and he is responsible, along with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for using his money to fund AIDS and HIV prevention programs that are solely directed towards campaigning for decriminalisation and handing out condoms. And that's pretty much it. So this is all a bit confusing, so I'll try and be very straightforward about it. The AIDS and HIV lobby, which I write about in a chapter in my book, are usually, almost always, pro-prostitution and pro-decriminalisation. The AIDS and HIV movement was mainly populated in the 1980s during the AIDS pandemic by libertarian gay men who had no critique whatsoever of sexual practice and sexual politics, but who were genuinely fighting to stop the spread of this hideous disease and to keep themselves and other gay men who were very badly affected safe. The other population, of course, that were at risk were prostituted people, some of whom were also gay men. And so the way that the AIDS movement built up its ideology was to say, if we're being arrested by police, this is prostituted people, we might be suspected of being in prostitution because we're carrying condoms. And therefore, we're not going to use condoms, and therefore we're really at risk of HIV. And these arguments were used on behalf of prostituted women and also gay men who would go cruising, have outdoor sex with multiple partners. Now, clearly, this problem is solved with the Nordic model because we don't arrest the women. We don't arrest anyone in prostitution. But this argument was extended to the fact that if women think that their clients are going to be criminalised, then the women might come under the police radar anyway. They might be evicted from their flats. It might mean they don't visit health clinics because of the stigma. I mean, there's no real logic to this argument. As I say, the Nordic model deals with all of this. But Soros has poured millions upon millions upon millions of his money into organisations that have a dual purpose: to lobby for decriminalisation of the entire sex trade and to reduce HIV and AIDS. And he's clearly very wedded to this issue. I'm sure Agnete has the figures there because she's been poring over them from my book, but I haven't read it since I sent it in February, and I can't remember all of them. But he is funding the bigger, the very, very big global sex fund projects, sex work projects rather. So those that represent hundreds of these sex worker projects, and particularly in the global south.
Okay. Yes, I said that Mr. George Soros is now putting his foot into Norway. And what is Norway internationally known for? It's known for our law, yes, but Sweden also have that one. But we are known through the Amnesty International's report, when they made 4 country reports about the situation for prostituted person, women and men, and they picked Norway as a European country. They could have picked the Netherlands or Germany, for example. But they picked Norway, and they made an 80-page report on Norway. And what happened when that report was launched was that I wrote against it, the women's movement in Norway wrote against it, and also your own Amnesty International Women's Branch here based here in Stavanger went up against Amnesty's new policy of going for full legalization. And we don't count actually, but when the Norwegian, the head of the police exit the organized crime office in the Oslo police went against Amnesty, how they had made up their mind before they quoted him, and also the senior advisor in the Minister of Justice and Beredskap, Jan Austad, he also publicly said the same. They went against the report. So the whole report, Amnesty report, was a little bit shaky, because their main claim in the report is that the law has made it more difficult for women in prostitution. They experience more violence, and they experience more violence from the police. Police. That is the main lirum larum that Amnesty had in its report. They interviewed 50 women with experience from prostitution. They said they only quoted 12. Okay, this is the present situation in Norway. Then comes an advertisement. If you go into Open Society Foundation and look up, I don't know how I did it, but oops, up it came. An invitation for groups. The Open Society Public Health Program calls for letters of intent, that is application, from organizations, informal groups, and networks in France, Germany, Ireland, the Netherlands, Sweden, and United Kingdom, and Norway. And what could we apply? We could be the happy one to get $50,000 and to use that $50,000 over a period of 24 months to try to change the dominant narratives on sex work. That means come up with narratives that would make, for example, the public opinion here in Norway to say that the law is bad. It is against everything we believe in. Okay, those interested can read this themselves in the web page, and it is. I reported it to one of the ministry, because this is in a way usually donors of philanthropists can give money to university to sort of more cancer research or look into historical interesting things, and I will give 10 millions to the institute. This is to individual to change the... If I was a journalist, I would apply. I mean, with a second opinion. Okay, that is one example. Another example is that he has donated money to UN institutions as UN AIDS, that is HIV/AIDS policy, UN's policy on HIV/AIDS, HIV/AIDS, I mean, and to UNDP, United Nations Development Programs. That was, I mean, they have before been highly regarded, but what have been changed now that there are the United Nations Development Program, they have changed, they have a position that they are for legalization. That will be better for the world in all. And they fund Amnesty International, and they fund Human Rights Watch. Egeland is the director of there. And some of the last year, Human Rights Watch also adopted the policy of being for sex work and legalization, at least for sex work. Apart from that, they have all the so-called sex workers' unions. So I felt when I read the book and I started to look into internet that I have been naive. And I would from now on always ask any institution, whatever they are on top level, or who funds you? Mm-hmm. And especially those you think are nearly family. Who funds you? Okay. Then, yes. Okay, he funds. He gave $100 million to eight sex workers, different sex workers' rights lobby. Lobby, that is to have influence. We are lobbying our cause as feminists, you know? And sex workers' rights lobby. Who are they? Who are the leaders in this movement? What motivates them to campaign to normalize and decriminalize the global oppression of women and girls? How come that so many lend their ears to what they say? How do they operate?
There are a number of sex workers' rights organisations, as they call themselves, that are very genuine, led by women in prostitution who firmly believe that blanket decriminalisation will be far better for them and it's the safest option. And of course they are too steeped in the politics of inevitability that they don't believe that men could do without this, and they don't believe that this is based on the premise that there are some groups of women who are here to do this. And these women are right. It would be better for them to be the privileged few that might be lucky enough not to have encountered violence, social exclusion, the loss of their children, drug and alcohol abuse issues, homelessness, pimping and violence. And it could well be that they are these quite privileged white women who are about as representative, you know, as I am, and don't speak for the millions of prostituted women for whom their reality is the one that we understand, of abuse and marginalisation and desperation. And then there are those organisations that are driven by ideology. They firmly believe that to criticise the sex trade is to criticise sex and to criticise men's access to whatever sex he wants, with whom, where and when. And then, of course, there are those that have a financial stake in this issue. The pimps, the brothel owners, the lap dance club owners, the sex buyers themselves, the academics that think they're very cool and edgy and who are studying this issue, thinking that they're on the right side because nobody wants to be one of those puritanical, anti-sex, moralistic feminists. So it's difficult to say that it's one monolithic movement, because it isn't. I mean, feminist abolitionists, such as myself, you know, I don't have much in common with a religious fundamentalist who campaigns against, in fact, I don't have anything in common with a religious fundamentalist who campaigns against prostitution because they believe that sex before marriage is a sin and that women are dirty for doing it. And I also don't have anything in common with an abolitionist who wishes to see an end to prostitution because they believe that women should just make themselves freely available for men without pay. But the sex workers' rights movement is assisted greatly by the pro-sex trade academics. They do the research that you can write their conclusions before they've published it, that says, that completely deproblematizes prostitution. They use the euphemisms such as migration for sex work. They claim that barely any women are trafficked into the sex trade because they just shift the goalposts, they shift the definitions. They often talk about empowerment for women and women's choice and focus it on the women choosing it as opposed to the men imposing it. So, in other words, Agnete, it's impossible to answer your question, but there is a very loud, very vocal sex workers' rights movement in the global south that are, sometimes they're Soros funded, sometimes not, that speak for women, for example in Cambodia, that don't think for 1 minute that decriminalisation would help them. I mean of the men and of the pimps, that don't for 1 minute think of themselves as sex workers, but are spoken for by well-paid NGO leaders who travel the world colonising their experience.
Yes. One of the chapter is headed A Queer Defense of the Sex Trade. And in that chapter you also have a part headed, quote, The Pact Between Trans and Sex Workers' Right. Could you give us some examples here from the book?
The modern-day pro-prostitution lobbyists and ideologues usually take a neoliberal approach to this issue. If women are poor, then why would we, as Kenneth Roth said, he's the head, he's the chief exec of Human Rights Watch, and I think he's on a salary of about £130,000 sterling. Anyway, he's on a very big salary. He's a white privileged man who said, why remove the option of voluntary sex work for poor women? And to which my good friend and colleague Rachel Moran tweeted at him, because this was carried out on Twitter, something like, and I'm sure she'll forgive me for paraphrasing, surely the thing, Kenneth Roth, to do when a woman is hungry is to put food in her mouth and not your cock. So this I think speaks for itself. The neoliberalism of the left is truly shocking and disgraceful. You have people on the left thinking that it's fine to use the female body as a marketplace, as items to trade. Hair, breast milk, of course, women's orifices are all up for sale or rent. And when we hear that poor, desperate men have sold a kidney to escape from the Congo or to escape from a war-torn country. We think that's terrible that he had to do that. And I'm sure we'd all agree that we would criminalise the surgeon and the purchaser of that kidney. But there you go, when it's women's bodies, there's an excuse made for that. Now, this all leads me to answer your question, because neoliberal politics, of course, lends itself to postmodernism, where there's no material reality in anything anymore. And so everything's topsy-turvy, everything's Alice through the looking glass. It's like Orwellian times. For example, the defence by white liberals of women being covered in the full face veil is a disgrace. I'm not talking about criticising women wearing the veil, which I'm against, but I mean this complete defence, as though, again, it's a choice, it's her choice. You're being Islamophobic if you criticise this. Similarly, with the transgender issue, again, it's liberals who have got no idea about any of the ideology behind this, but who say, how could you possibly tell that trans woman that she's not a real woman like you? Just thinking that they're defending oppressed groups of people when actually what they're defending is a hideous ideology. And it's the same with the sex trade. So there's a rainbow coalition of people who would argue that they live outside of the margins in the Western world. So you might have what used to be the lesbian and gay community and is now the LGBTQQIPQIPQ, what the fuck. And it's basically anyone is allowed in here if they identify as queer. And many sex workers' rights campaigners say that their sex working is part of a sexual identity. And because the lesbian and gay movement, is fairly mainstream and vibrant, the sex workers' rights activists have latched on to that movement, and in turn, a lot of the misogynist transgender community has attached itself to the lesbian and gay and sex work community. Now, I need to make it clear here, most trans people do not support this nonsense. Most trans people are just trying to live their lives without discrimination and violence. But there is a very vocal lobby in this country, in my country and elsewhere, which is a men's rights movement. It's just vicious and misogynistic. And the arguments that are used by some of this minority within a minority is that trans women use sex work to fund their surgery and hormone treatment, and because they're excluded from mainstream jobs. And therefore, we can't criticise prostitution, because that in and of itself is transphobic. And there are some key individuals that turn up to picket feminist events that are that would identify themselves as transgender sex workers, and they've become merged into one movement.
Yes, thank you. Then another headline, another chapter is sex trade academics. Within the world of academia, the most popular view of the sex trade is clearly that of decriminalization. Why is the view that prostitution is labor rather than abuse so prevalent within the academia?
Oh, well, I've already spoken a little bit about this.
But a bit more, please.
But I think with the academy, it's this cool, edgy niche that many academics want for themselves. Most academics don't have a name for themselves, aren't known as experts in anything in particular. They're jobbing academics. They don't get brilliant research published that gets in the newspapers or on TV. And some who are very ambitious really want to make sure that they have a niche, I think. And, of course, feminism is so deeply dull and boring, isn't it? Because we've been saying all the time this has to stop. This is about male power and male violence against women. And, you know, we've now gone mainstream with this research. And it's now accepted that male violence against women is part of male supremacy and patriarchy. So these academics think, no, let's have a look at this from a different angle. I want to uncover something new. And there we have it. There's the academics who insist that increasingly men are selling sex and women are buying it. There are the academics who are the trafficking deniers, who decide what trafficking is, and then say that very few women are trafficked. And it's become really shocking the way that peer review works, where articles and books written by academics in institutions are sent out to other academics in the field, so that they can decide whether the work is up to scratch and should be published. And they peer review each other's work all the time. And if they get that there are very few academics in the UK, for example, and elsewhere, that take our position on the sex trade, that are against it because they know it's harmful. And those academics will have their work just completely dismissed if it's sent to peer review to a pro-sex trade academic. So they've cornered the market. And a lot of them are anthropologists, or that they favour the kind of research that involves hanging out with the community that they're researching. They think it makes them better researchers. They think that they're kind of, you know, down with the cool kids. And of course they go a bit native, and this is reflected in their research. Yeah,
the possibility to have an article that have a different view than the trendy academics at the moment, and that means also in Norway. And you have another position, of course, based on research. That doesn't matter. You will not be accepted. So the need has made that the international scholars that sharing our view has funded a new peer-reviewed paper, and its name is Dignity. You can go into Dignity, and there you will find, and it's free for you to read, and there you will find, for example, a distinguished academic scholar from Sweden, Sven Axel Monsen, who was the one who really gave evidence to the need of the Nordic law in Sweden. He has written on men buying sex for 30 years, and he has just now come up with a new article telling about the development from 1980 until now, Sweden. That is Dignity. And we are both on the board, by the way.
I'm not.
Oh gosh, then we accept you as a writer. Yeah, okay, that was. No, it is, that is a good thing. Follow Dignity. And then it is the chapter Surviving the Sex Trade, Exit Prostitution, doing the transformation from sex worker to survivor, and taking part in the survivor movement. You say, Julie, over and over here, that the survivors, they are the experts. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate a little bit here?
Well, we wouldn't know anything about prostitution without the women who are brave enough and tenacious enough to speak out about it. And I'm not romanticising this at all. We know that the women's movement, the anti-male violence women's movement, is built on the fact that women have told the truth, that women have spoken out, that women have refused to be silenced. And we can see this back in the 1960s in the US, in the UK, and elsewhere, where women were in consciousness-raising groups, as they were called, where they would speak about, oh gosh, yes, my husband does that to me too. Does yours? I thought it was just me. And slowly, the women's movement became full of these expert women who would tell governments and policymakers and anyone else, social workers, police, this is the reality of domestic violence, this is the reality of rape, and increasingly today, this is the reality of prostitution. So we're about 30 years behind with the number of sex trade survivors that are speaking out, as we are on other issues of male violence, for the simple reason that the stigma does stay with the women often, because the women are often in danger, as all of us are who've suffered male violence. But unlike the women who are raped and the women who are beaten within relationships and the children that are abused that become adults, there isn't an entire industry rewriting their experience for them and using a very powerful narrative, claiming that they are empowered sex workers and that this isn't violence at all. And that as long as you remove the stigma and the police stop arresting you, this is a great job. So I interviewed 50 survivors for the book and many more women over the years that I've been working on this issue as a campaigner and as a writer. And it's an incredible movement because the women have been through what I would consider to be the worst experience of male violence and abuse. And yet they are just taking no nonsense from the lobby. They're defamed, they are lied about, they are abused verbally, are called liars, they're told that they've made up their stories for money, that they're religious moralists. I mean, all kinds of things that are thrown at these women, and they just don't give up. And people say, listen to sex workers. You've got to listen to us. Listen to sex workers. Who do you think you are? You're not a sex worker. Why can't you listen to us? Well, I am listening to the women, but I'm not listening to those women. I've listened to them, the 1%, the tiny minority that say that it's a great job and that it should be legal and that the only problem is the police and that the customers are lovely and that there's no such thing as pimping. And I've heard enough. So I listen to the survivors, and if every one of those survivors could write their own book, like Rachel Moran and others have, no one would be happier than me. But in the meantime, I feel I've got a moral and ethical duty and responsibility to recount their words. I'm not telling their stories. They've told me their stories. Their stories are in the book for you to read. I've just provided a platform and used the privilege that I have as a writer for the women to tell their stories to anyone who chooses to read it. And they are the best bunch of women I've met, without question.
Yes, and they are the ones who make a big change in the world, and because even if not every one of them can write a book, every one of them that are a member of the abolitionist movement, they have a voice, and they are so courageous. They are the ones who stand up in hearings before the law was debated in Canada, in Northern Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, in the Parliament of UK, and had to debate, give their voice and debate with sex workers. I mean, a battle. They go into the battles every time they open up, they are speaking. I think I have seen that the survivors who want to continue their political fight for a better society without prostitution, they have done a transformation from prostituted person, subordinated, to a full-blown leader. Leader. That is our leaders. This week, today is on Thursday, it was opening session in UN in New York with a session on trafficking. That is the core, that's in the heart of the problem. And one of the survivors from South Africa, actually one that the Women's Front Norway are funding. She went with that money to New York and stood beside the General Secretary and spoke about her situation as a prostituted woman and trafficked before. And you can have it on YouTube. You're looking like that. And I went to Colombia in the FARC country, in Caquetá, just when they had the peace agreement. I met an abolitionist organization run by exited prostituted women. They have exited thousands of sisters, actually 1,000, and they had jobs. But I was rather, surprised, I would guess, when I heard that 3 of them actually had been elected to be mayor in their hometowns. And one of the towns is that city, Doncello. It's a fairy tale, but it is a reality. They are making a change. Yep. We have an extra question, because to end this talk, Julie, you have done 250 interviews, as Margaret said, with people from all parts of the sex trades, pro-prostitution and abolitionists. They all knew that they would be quoted in that book. You have, in that book, 511 references to articles and documents that is the foundation for what you are quoting also, apart from the interviews. But even the less, when you demask those behind the sex trade, they will go after you. Some academics and other pro-sex trade activists have already tried very hard to get your publisher to withdraw the book from publishing, and have launched a campaign to discredit you and other abolitionists. How is the situation now?
Well, there's a bit of a childish campaign at the moment amongst the pro-prostitution lobby to leave 1-star reviews on Amazon saying it's a rubbish book. None of them have read it, of course. It's fine if somebody wants to give a 1-star review because they don't like it, fine, but this is clearly a campaign. I'm a journalist, I find things on the internet quite easily. Look, it's hellish for the survivor abolitionists. It's bearable for me. I'm part of a movement that is extremely supported. This is a battle. This is a war. This is tearing down one of the most potent, profitable, patriarchal institutions and set of beliefs that exist in the world. And, this is one grain of sand on the beach of abolitionism. For every book like mine that is published, there are 30 from the pro-prostitution lobby. It is a miracle that it actually did get printed. They can say whatever they like about me, and if it goes too far, then clearly, I'll have to take action. But so far I've had that I'm a rabid anti-Semite because I criticised George Soros. So presumably the woman that he tried to strangle and reported him is also a rabid anti-Semite. I am funded by oil money to fly around the world in luxurious fashion. What else have I done? In the late 1980s, I picketed gay men's AIDS charities because I believed that money should go to women's organisations. I mean, talk about a nasty slur against anyone. They have said that I am swimming in money, that I am corrupt, that I made at my interviews. Somebody had the gall to ask if I would put all of my original research, all those hours of audio tape that are all stored, to make them available. Otherwise, they'd just have to think that I'd just made everything up. So, look, it's a war, and we will win.
Yes, you said. Wait a second. You said that we are at a crossroad. But I would say we are in a battlefield, and as you said now, it's a war. And that our time is up, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think we leave.
All right. I will try to do this in English, since we have a special guest here. And you all help me out if I am missing some words when I do this. My name is Magnar Silseth. I work for the Southwest Police District. I have my office in Stavanger. I work with organized crime, and for the last 2 years worked with the THB, trafficking in human beings. And I guess that's why I was invited here today, and I really appreciate that. Ever so often we do go out in meetings. Last time we were on a meeting was in Sandnes for a political party. At that time there was an open meeting. KrF had this meeting and wanted us to talk about THB. And at that time, some days later on, we got this published in RA, the local newspaper, selling sex in our district for 59 million kroners. So it's also a lot of money. I will tell something later on regarding this figure, because it's hard for us to say anything particular certainty regarding the omsetning. Well, the trade, the money that they're trading this in. So I will say something about this, the profits, yeah. I will say something about, just let me move this one. Something about the situation in Stavanger as we know it, as we see it. It's a field which it's hard to say very certain how the situation is, but we know something about it, but there are very few reporting back to the police. We have to find out ourselves. We do that by talking to the women who are having their advertisement out on internet. We are talking to women that are on the streets. And we're also finding a lot of information in open sources as well on internet that we are able to use in our fight against THB. Yes. Regarding the Sex Buyers Act, if you call it that, those caught for that by the police will get a ticket, first-time ticket for 20,000 Norwegian kroners, and it will increase if they are caught by several times. Lately, there has been some challenges regarding the act, because we had a new penalty code for some couple of years ago, and it is the situation is that attempt buying, if you try to buy the sex but you're not fulfilling the act, then the lawyers tells us that it's with a new penalty code, it's not illegal. We do hope, and we have got signals that this will be adjusted when the penalty code is being reviewed, and we're hoping it's going to be soon. Some of our cases regarding sex buyers has been closed without any ticket fine due to the evidence situation in the particular cases. So for us, it's quite common to talk about the market outside. Those are the women walking the streets, selling sex from the streets, and from the inner market, where the women are advertising mainly from internet and social media. Regarding the girls going on the streets in Stavanger, they are mainly, as you probably all know, from Africa and Nigerians. We have experienced also that there are some from Eastern Europe, but mainly the women on the streets are from Nigeria. And we estimate that it's between 15 or 20 girls walking the streets in Stavanger selling sex. We also have the responsibility for Sandnes and Haugesund, other main centers in our county, but we do not have any reports of girls walking the streets there on a regular basis. So what we call the inside market is mainly, it is the biggest market where prostitutions are available for buyers. There is a particular one website called the Real Escort that is mainly used for this. In Rogaland, we have been monitoring that situation for some time, and the average profiles for Rogaland on this website, it's about 90 profiles. Today it was a little over 90 profiles outside on this website, and for Stavanger it's about 65% the profiles advertise that they are in Stavanger, and then it's Sandnes about 20%, and Haugesund is about 10%. The lowest numbers of profiles that we have discovered in our region is 56 profiles on the internet, on this internet site, and the highest was 120. By saying this, I'm using the words profiles because a lot of these women have several profiles out, advertising with different names and different pictures and different services as well. So it's hard for us to say how many persons, how many prostitutes are out there in our region, but we can say something about the profiles and do some estimates regarding that, and that's what we have done, and that's also the estimates we have come through when we had this number, 59 million. It's hard for us also to say where the women are from. Our experience is that they are from inside Europe, mainly from the Eastern Europe, and some also from Latin America as well, we discovered, from Colombia and Brazil. We also have discovered that there are other places that they do advertisement and where they and where customers can get in contact with the women, and that's also on Facebook and Snapchat and dating services as Tinder and Match. Yes, we believe that the Sex Act is a tool for the police to be able to get in contact with the girls. We talk to the girls as witnesses. They have done nothing wrong. Our experience is that the girls now realize this, believes it, and that they are that it's easier for us to talk to them, and we experience that it's easier for them to talk to us as well. We believe that the law is a deterrent for other offenders as well, and also that the sex code implies building and maintaining normative barriers in the society. So I think it's important that we have it. Often we have experienced that the gate to more serious crime is in the beginning of a sex buyer's violation. And that could be pimping or even THB, trafficking in human beings. Yes. I think that's the situation. Are there any questions that you had? Yes?
There's much criticism of the abolitionist law, or the Nordic law as it's known. Agnete touched a little bit on it previously, but I just want to tell you what is being said, because I think that knowledge is power for us to be able to refute the arguments and tell the truth. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that it's perfect, or that every single police officer in Norway is perfect. I'm sure you are, but I do believe in looking critically even at the models that we support. But there are downright lies being told about this law, which is that it de facto criminalises the prostituted person as well, that they are made homeless because landlords are informed that they are in prostitution, that children are taken away from women because of the stigma, which didn't exist prior to this law, and that because of it, a woman has been murdered, not by the violent man, of course, but by the law itself. And also that, that the women don't trust the police. Can you just give us the reality from your perspective, please?
Yes. Well, as I said, I believe that for the women it's easier. That's my experience. For those few that I have spoken to, that it's easier for them to talk to us. There is Pimping Act that we have, that it's illegal to rent out your apartment if you know that it's selling sex inside the apartment. That gives us some challenges sometimes, because when the police knows that some criminal activities is going on in the house, we have some kind of an obligation to tell the man who could be responsible, who could be charged for pimping, that there's something going on in your house, the house that you're renting out, and those who have the blame, or those who have the most negative effect on that, is the women that has to move out, because the landlord will cancel the contract immediately. And that is a part of the Pimping Act in the Norwegian Penalty Code, and will have to be used on with, I would say, cleverness, or yeah.
The women you are talking to, in those few examples that you gave, that you have been, that you know that the landlord evicted them. One of the criticism that has been raised then is that they are evicted from their homes. But what I know is that this is not their homes, that they are traveling. They are perhaps staying there for 3 weeks, then move to another city in Norway, or out of the country again. Would you say that, do you know of women that are staying fixed here in Stavanger, home?
Yes, I think we could say that there are the mobility of the women are high, but some are also staying in our region for a longer time. We have been here for several years, actually, and they are renting apartments on the private market. Some of those that you referred to that are moving around after a month, they are often, due to our experience, that they are renting apartments by professional landlords. Yeah, apartments, I don't know what you call that in English, but professional companies renting out others' apartments. Yeah.
Try in English. I wonder how many police are working in that field, because it's quite often that we can see prostitution going on in the streets, but it's very rare to see that any men are getting caught for it.
No. To be caught by it, the problem now is that attempt is not punishable. You know, if he tries to buy it, it's not punishable. So he will go free. So after the act, if you're getting me, then it's when you can take him for violate the law. And that's not on the street, that is outside. But we have had some cases that has been closed, henlagt, due to the situation of that trying to buy is not a crime.
But how many are you that work in that field?
Well, regarding the working with taking sex buyers, it is a part of the patrol units in the different cities dealing with it. I can't give you a figure because there's no one having that as a particular task. We have several tasks, and sometimes this is happening that some of the girls are calling the police and says there's a problem. He won't pay. He has been rough to me, you know, and stuff like that. Then they report it, and they write the reports for buying. But I can't give you a figure of how many, because there's nobody having that as a particular field. It's a part of the whole things that we are working with. Yeah. But if you go further down the line, for pimping and for THB, trafficking in human beings, that is put to the section called Organized Crime Unit in our police district. Yeah.
Yes, I had two questions. How do you actually call those men? Are you spying on them, or you are on the street? And my second question is there any system who helps the women, the prostitutes? What do you know about that? Are you cooperating with someone here, or is there any system around it?
Yes. For your first question, we do follow to see what's happening, because two people talking to each other can only give us an idea of what's going on. But at the end of the day, we have to prove it for court. Eventually, we will have to go to court. You know, if there is a disagreement between the court guy and the police, then we will have to tell the judge what we have seen. And then the judge is the one who's deciding it. So we have to follow, and we have to see what's happening. For your other question is that we do cooperate with NGOs in the region. We are cooperating with Albertine, Kirkens Bymisjon, krisesenteret as well, in several cases. When we talk to the girls, we give them. Sometimes it's hard to get the good conversation, a truly conversation there, because the other girls are perhaps in the nearby, sitting on the chair nearby. We giving our phone numbers, giving the opportunity to call us. We tell them about Albertine as well, that they have the possibility to call them. Yeah. If there is a THB case, then it's in another step, because at that time you have some formal rights as a victim to get legal help, for instance, and what we call a reflection time. I believe it's
Could I just ask, what are the ages of the women you know of in this region?
Again, it's hard to say something about the ages, because our main sources where we get most information is from open sources out on the internet, and that's not the truth that is there. We see that women from Romania says that they are from Italy, because they tell some, and I would assume that that's also the same for the age as well.
Because I was just wondering, because you keep calling them girls.
Yeah,
but if they were girls,
women.
It would be, so they are women.
That's my English.
Not to,
I just wanted to this report is named Koordineringsenheten for ofre for menneskehandel, and that is the report for 2016. Okay, take it in Norwegian. Dette her en rapport, dere finner den på internett, men dere må huske på koordineringsenheten. Forkortet det KOM, og da finner dere nesten ikke. Og der får dere masse eksempler på de som har blitt ofre for menneskehandel med mål å bli seksuelt utnyttet. Masse tall som hentet inn fra hele landet. Der står det også tall fra Rosa-prosjektet. Og da kan dere gå inn på Rosa-prosjektet og se på 2016-rapporten der. Det faktisk ikke politiet sin oppgave, men vår oppgave sammen med andre å presse på bedre program for kvinnene som kommer i kontakt med politiet, som kommer i kontakt med Albertine, etc., og tilby dem exit-program. Det opp til oss å få bedre regler som gjør at ikke utlendingspolitiet kaster dem ut før de har blitt identifisert som offer. Og dessverre, og der kan vel du være enig, så må politiet av og til henlegge saker hvor det klare ofre, kvinner som har blitt ofre for menneskehandel. Det står her. Men fordi de ikke har ressurser til å gjennomføre rettssaker med vittner fra Romania, etc. Så vi har en god del å gjøre, vi.
Jeg får kommentere, for jeg tenker som så jeg tror en rettssak ville ha blitt gjennomført hvis det hadde ikke stått på å få vittner fra Romania for å få dem opp hit, for å si det sånn. Vi har vært og hentet jenter, men at det kan være bevissituasjon som gjør det vanskelig. Ja. For det ikke mange måneder siden hvor vi hentet ei jente fra Spania for å få henne opp her for å være med å vitne i en straffesak som vi hadde da her i Stavanger. Ja, det helt rett. Det dyr rettsforskning, det helt opplagt.
Det en kommentar til, eller spørsmål. Jeg har ikke sett noen her bak. Da har vi 2 kommentarer, og så må vi avslutte.
Just wonder how many men have been caught, been taken in this here in Rogaland?
I have the numbers for 2017, and it's 17 cases, 17, that we have this year. But when I look into them, there are some challenges regarding this attempt. Attempt problematic. Yeah.
Jeg må bare ta dette på norsk. Jeg jobber jo som frivillig for Albertine, og jeg ser jo at det største problemet jo når disse kvinnene ikke har oppholdstillatelse, og de kan ikke komme i kontakt, de jo livredde for å komme i kontakt med politiet. Hva gjør dere, altså, akkurat når det kommer til disse saker, og de kulturelle forskjellene, mistilliten til politiet, det noe arbeid for dette her?
Ja, og da prater vi da om jenter som kvinner som utenfra fra andre land, utenfor Europa, utenfor Schengen, og i de sammenheng så det refleksjonsperiode som de kan søke om, og få juridisk bistand også i forhold til
for den jo veldig vanskelig å få til for de fleste kvinnene, for de fleste får jo avslag på refleksjonsperioden. Ja. Og de blir ikke trodd på. Altså, det jo mange ting rundt det. Så det et sånn spesifikt arbeid for å møte disse kvinnene, både i kommunikasjonen, altså, med tanke på kulturforskjellene, tillit, altså, ja. Utenom frivillige organisasjoner.
Ja, og da det nok frivillige organisasjoner som i hovedsak vil komme i kontakt med dem, hvis det sånn at de ikke redd for å prate med politiet. Men hvis politiet har en mistanke om at det en menneskehandelssak, så har man altså de rettighetene som gjelder i forhold til refleksjonsperiode. Og det det som politiet kan vise til. Da har man altså tilgang til fri juridisk rettshjelp i 3 timer, som kan utvides. Og så det denne refleksjonsperioden som skal være på 6 måneder, hvor man da skal kunne ta stilling til om man skal klare også å bryte med dette miljøet. Så det spørsmålet om 6 måneder nok, og det vet jeg en diskusjon som pågår, og det står blant annet i KÅKÅ-rapporten også, hvor det blir tatt opp, om den burde vært utvidet. Men det det som per i dag. 6 måneder det som i refleksjonsperioden, og det starten, det inngangsporten til videre rettigheter og eventuelt til slutt opphold for et offer for menneskehandel.
Tusen takk til deg, Magnar, og tusen takk til alle frammøtte. Dere har mulighet for å kjøpe boken her. Magnar, du skal få den som tusen takk for at du møtte hos oss. Diskusjonen fortsetter, det sikker på. Kampen ikke over. De pleier å slutte her på KÅKÅ 13:30, men vi har valgt oss å ta oss litt frihet og avslutter nå. Takk for fremmøtet.